Um, but with that out of the way, I'm really excited to welcome everyone here tonight. I'm Hazel. I'm the programming assistant at ArtSpace. I'll be moderating the discussion. We're going to be talking about independent projects, what that means, the challenges involved, opportunities of being an independent entity in the publishing world. Um, and yeah, just get some takes on emerging and underrepresented voices in art criticism. So I'm really excited to dive in. But before we get to that, I just want to respectfully acknowledge that both ArtSpace and myself are located on the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe First Nation within the boundaries of Ojibwanon. So I'm going to get our panelists, our three panelists, to introduce themselves, but we'll be hearing from Off-Center, Femme Art Review, and Peripheral Review. So just going from the order on my screen, Luke, if you would like to start us off with an introduction to yourself and Off-Center and what you guys get up to.
Absolutely. So my name is Luke Matterford. I'm representing Off Center, which is an online publication co-run by myself and Adrian Crossman. We're based out of Windsor and Hamilton. And we have a focus on contemporary art and writing that exists outside of major metropolitan centers, with a prioritizing emerging, marginalized and otherwise underrepresented artists. And we formed in 2019 in response to kind of the Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver centric art coverage that existed at the time and still kind of exists. So that's us.
Awesome, thank you. Adi, do you want to follow that up?
Better unmute myself. Hi, my name's Adi Berardini, and I run a publication called Femme Art Review. Femme Art Review is a publication that provides space for women and LGBTQ writers to reflect on art. And we're based in London, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape and Adirondacks peoples. We've been active as a publication since August 2018. We're primarily digital, but we do have a print issue and we plan on doing one actually soon. So yeah, that's a bit about us. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for that intro. And then finally, we have Angel from Peripheral Review.
Hi, I'm Angel Calendar. I'm the assistant editor at Peripheral Review, which is just run by myself and Lauren Lavery, who's the editor-in-chief. Our mandate is that we consider ourselves to be a platform for emerging and underrepresented art and writers, as well as enabling access by encouraging expanded and accessible critical dialogue. So emerging practices are like a big part of our mandate. We've been publishing since 2016, and we do an annual print journal every year that consists of all of the pieces we've published online during the year.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. And Angel, that's actually a great segue into the first question I have prepared. But before I launch into that, I just want to remind everyone this is very much an open discussion. So panelists and attendees, if you have any questions to raise for another panelist or for everyone at large, you can use the Q&A function or just drop it in the chat and I will moderate that question as well. But anyway, my first question was actually going to be about emerging artists. So I'm wondering, what is everyone's strategies for accommodating emerging artists, and how much of a portfolio, if any, do you believe is grounds to give an artist your support or your infrastructure through publishing?
I'll go first, I suppose, since I mentioned it. I would say that just because it is a part of our mandate pretty directly, we've always kind of advertised that very upfront, that we are looking for coverage of emerging artists, emerging practices like DIY spaces, project spaces. Lauren and I talked about this the other day. I think about like 50% of the content we publish is like a writer's first published piece. So we're pretty proud of that. And it's kind of just been like an ongoing thing, word of mouth, that people, you know, kind of know that they can come to us if they are just starting out.
Great.
Jump in. Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, I would just want to add, Femme Art Review, we also really do look for emerging practices with both artists and writers. Yeah, so I feel like one of the exciting parts of publishing is looking for emerging voices and being able to give coverage of emerging artists who may never have been written about. Yeah, so we definitely look for that, and we kind of look for artists that fit the theme. So if not necessarily, but if you make work about queerness and feminism, kind of look at whether we'd have kind of an interesting conversation around that. So yeah, it's definitely something that we're interested in supporting emerging artists.
I think that as smaller publications, and as a small publication, emerging artists are kind of attracted to us in the way that we're not as intimidating as a larger publication, and maybe at least on our end, we're really open to meeting people wherever they're at, whether they're a more established writer or if it's their first piece, and kind of working with them to polish it up and get the work to the standard that we want, whether it started there or not. It's important. We think it's important to meet the writers where they are and kind of help them out. That's what we're here for.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that there are publications that look like yours and like all of yours that are dedicated to emerging artists. Luke, your answer actually kind of leads into my next question, which is what does everyone feel that their role is in whatever community that you're located in as independent publishers, specifically kind of in relation to institutions that have more resources or more funding? And is that comparatively less amount of resources, has that presented a challenge for you? And also, how have you navigated around those challenges, if any?
I guess I'll jump in first. I feel like our role in the community is to kind of create connections and also visibility for women and queer artists and writers. I feel very fortunate that we've been able to collect or connect with local organizations such as LOMA, which stands for London Ontario Media Arts Association here locally. And we were able to actually kind of connect a writer to an artist. It was actually Jessica McCormack was the artist and Rebecca Castellino. And we were able to pay Rebecca a Carfax speaker's fee, and she also wrote an article on Jess's book Shame, Shame, Go Away. So it's been great to connect with local organizations to kind of create these new opportunities for artists and writers to connect. And we've also generously we've had space donated for a launch by Western University and Art Metropole. So it's also a great way to connect with local organizations through donating space as well. So yeah, that's a great question.
I think that one of the things we're able to do as a small publication is kind of operate in response to the larger institutions and kind of fill in some of the gaps that they leave behind, or some of the smaller things that are maybe not worth their time, or some of the smaller communities and regions that are maybe not on their radar, or not necessarily their focus. So I think kind of like operating in those gaps and filling in the spaces and helping people realize that there's more going on than just big cities and big institutions. There's all kinds of really wonderful things happening in all kinds of different places.
I would say that kind of over time, our role has kind of developed into being one of like trying to cover as many things in as many parts of the country as we can. Like I'm in Toronto, Lauren's in Vancouver. So we've kind of created a network where we have writers who will cover, come to us to cover things like in Winnipeg or on the East Coast, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, like we did one recently that was like a really small artist run center like in Harrison Lake, BC. So even like parts of provinces like kind of like what Off Center does, like outside of the large metropolitan area. Generally in terms of resources, that is, I would say, probably our biggest challenge. We both have a lot of ideas. We just don't always have the resources to make them happen. We still kind of rely on Canada Council project grants just to do like the reading series every year or to put together the print publication. And a lot of our writers' fees come either from that or out of pocket. So that is, our biggest challenge, obviously, that an institution doesn't have a problem with. But we do, like Luke said, we get to cover things that the institutions kind of don't deem as worthy of their time or their resources. So we can be proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a valuable niche to occupy in the arts community. I've just got a question from the chat here, which is how has your work with editing or publishing impacted your own writing?
Okay, I can answer that one. I do mostly work as a freelance writer, so that kind of relationship between writing and editing is like my daily grind, I would say. Working more as an editor with other writers, I would say, has given me more insight into like how that relationship works when I'm on the other side of it and like I'm the writer working with the editor. I've had very, very few like negative experiences, I would say. But you learn something new every time. And yeah, like Luke mentioned before, we also do try to meet writers where they're at. Like we will go through to bring a piece to the standards that we're looking for, even if it requires a little extra time, a little extra work. We have a volunteer editorial committee that helps us out with that. So we're grateful for those people and their time as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I really enjoy working with writers as an editor, and I feel like, if anything, it's really inspiring for my own work just to see how different writers approach writing about art. Yeah, that gives me a lot to think about. But yeah, I think that that's something that I enjoy is editing other writers' work and seeing their approach too.
I'm not really a writer, so I can't really speak to that. I'm only a sometimes writer.
That is totally okay. Thank you for those answers, Angel and Adi. Just moving on to our next question here. I wanted to ask about the effects of COVID. So we talked about this quite a bit in our last panel as well, but I'm interested to get a different perspective on it, as you guys are sort of working in a different corner of publishing than our previous guests, which were sort of news and magazine based. So COVID has obviously presented challenges in a lot of fields, but what are some of the ways that you have attempted to either successfully or unsuccessfully navigate around the challenges presented by the pandemic? How have you how has the outreach been impacted by people you might interview or publish. Any of that stuff would be great to hear about.
One of the things that we found is the past 2 years have been incredibly overwhelming for a lot of reasons. And being an independent publisher and kind of being able to create our own timelines and schedules, it's given us the time to go, okay, like we don't have to rush everything through right now. It's okay to kind of go at our own pace, take things slowly, and kind of like deal with what's happening in the world without overwhelming ourselves with this project as well, and just kind of let it happen as it happens.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's definitely been an overwhelming time with the pandemic. It's really changed the way the art world operates. And one thing that I found was interesting is since we're mainly online, we're pretty well versed in sharing art online too. So that part wasn't too changed. But we actually launched our print issue like a few days before everything was shut down. So it really did affect our distribution of our print issue. We had to email a lot of bookstores. There was a lot of shipping, but we weren't able to really get it out through like art book fairs, like in person, which is too bad. So it really did affect our distribution of our print issue. That's kind of the main thing that was affected by COVID. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the book fairs, Adie, because that's also kind of one of our main ways of distributing our publications and like our other merchandise. So that was kind of a challenge when those things went online. You don't have the same, you know, volume of people coming through and just kind of checking you out and asking questions and stuff like that. So that was a big blow to our distribution as well as, you know, our another means of us kind of getting funds that we use to pay writers and stuff. But also in a pretty direct way, like we usually publish every year, but we didn't do it in 2020. And instead, the one that just recently came out is 2020 and 2021 together. So we were creating a much larger publication. And there was, you know, printing during COVID, there was a bunch of like paper and pricing inflation. So everything became a lot more expensive. So that was a challenge as well. And also just Canada Council cutting back on funding was difficult, especially if we're trying to get through having to pay more to do the thing that we do. So that was difficult. But otherwise as well, we also are very heavily online. We have always kind of been upfront about the fact that we're a little slow with our publishing schedule. So we kind of just hoped that people knew that coming in, and it didn't. There wasn't too much of a change to that during COVID, but the rest of it, yeah.
I just have a follow-up question to the COVID topic coming out of the chat, which is what have been the best either coping mechanisms or adaptations you have seen in your artists and writers during the last 2 years?
I think that a lot of people approached the way that they interact with and view with art in new ways during the pandemic, and that's affected the way that they write about work and the type of work that they're writing about as well. I know there's a lot more online things happening over the past 2 years, and that interaction is very different than the type of interaction you'd have with in a physical exhibition. And in a way, having publications about the physical exhibitions that were happening is a little bit more important because less people were able to go see those exhibitions in person. And I think that for the artists whose work was being written about, it kind of meant a lot more to have some writing about it out in the world, and kind of more exposure for their project.
That's a great point, Luke. And I found that even a lot of reviews like kind of address the fact that like, oh, I've gone out to write about this. It's my first time going to see art for a while at a museum. So it's even affected the writing in that way. And one thing I found was interesting too is we've been getting a lot more like book reviews and like zine reviews rather than like art exhibitions, which I find is an interesting pivot since maybe people are reading books with the pandemic more often instead of going to see art if it's closed. So that's been interesting as well.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting that a lot of the pieces that we'd get during that time would kind of have this disclaimer of like, oh, I wanted to go see this and then it closed. And so it stayed open a little bit longer. So I went when I was able to go. Like a lot of the shows that would have their kind of like extended exhibition dates. And we also got a few submissions about like online performances, which was fun. So we actually haven't gotten any book reviews. I kind of wish that we would.
Got another one from the chat. Someone is just wondering if you can speak to your submission process and deadlines. Do you accept submissions year round or during certain time periods?
We have seasonal deadlines that we open and announce when we have like maybe a few weeks coming up to it to give people some time. We do also take finished drafts as well as pitches. I'm not sure what else to say about that. Yeah. Oh, we also we started last fall, we did some workshops for like new writers on how to like craft a pitch, like what to expect from the pitching process, what you should include, what you should say, things like that. So we may start doing some more of that. It was actually very, very fruitful, I think. People enjoyed it.
Yeah, for us, we take submissions. Typically, in the past, we have taken them just like throughout the year. I have had them shut for a bit. It depends on since I do it as a side project. It depends on if I'm working on another project elsewhere. Sometimes I'll have to close it. Yeah, we do try to keep it open pretty frequently throughout the year.
We have a constant rolling submission, no deadline. Send us your things. We might not look at them right away, but we will get back to you eventually. And we try to keep it pretty relaxed. But we're always open to any kinds of submissions or pitches or finished works.
Awesome. Love that flexibility. One more from the chat here. Are there any particular issues or ideas that your publications are particularly interested in at the moment?
Well, we're kind of working on a new project that is new for us. We're trying to put out some chapbooks that will be like 2 a year for this year and next year. So a few of them, well, each one of them we've commissioned guest editors who kind of decide the content, decide who they're including. So in that way, we're kind of like branching out into like a collaboration type project that we're looking forward to. I'm not sure if there are like particular ideas that we're particularly interested in. We're just kind of like choosing people whose work we're interested in and kind of giving them some free rein to experiment.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that we try to kind of keep the theme broad, like we have pretty open submissions. But one thing I find interesting is sometimes I'll notice themes of the submissions we do get. Like we've been interested or a lot of our past content for the past couple months has been about like digital feminism, things like that. The environment is usually a common theme. So it's interesting to see, even though there's not a set theme, how things still connect. Yeah. And for our upcoming issue that we hope to launch soon, we're looking at specifically at queer and feminist collaborations. So artists that work collaboratively in their practice. So yeah, I look forward to seeing that and what submissions we'll get for that.
We're not necessarily interested in any particular issues or ideas that are outside of our normal mandate, but we are always interested in representing more and more regions, and kind of especially branching out of Ontario right now. We've been fairly Ontario centric lately, and we're kind of trying to get out there a little bit.
As a follow-up to that, I was wondering if maybe Adi, I'm sorry, you could springboard this question since you've talked about this a little bit in your previous answers. But I'm wondering if any of you have faced any challenges in trying to ensure that marginalized voices are heard in your publications.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a great question. We definitely how I like to view it is like through community building. I find that in order to make sure that there's like a diverse kind of representation of practices is really just through like connecting with people and community building. That's the way I like to frame it. We do keep in open submissions too, so we're definitely open in hearing about a range of practices. And yeah, but I think that that has become a really essential point is through community building, because I used to do an internship in book publishing, and I found sometimes the way that books were like approached is like a bit tokenistic. It's kind of like, oh well, this thing will sell, but I really just am more interested in like community engagement in the way that I approach things. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you for that. Angel or Luke, did you want to jump in on that at all before we move on?
I will. I think one of the things that is a big challenge for us is Adrian and I are both white queers, and in order to work with other communities, we have to build trust with those communities, which I think Adi was also speaking to. And we find it important to let those communities represent themselves in the way they would like to be represented, and not be forceful. And also pairing writers with projects and projects with writers where they have relevant experience and can speak to it, not just as a writer or as an artist, but maybe they're already involved in those communities, or they relate to the project in a larger way that becomes relevant to the writing and the publication.
Yeah, I would say our approach is similar to what Luke and Adi both said. Again, Lauren and I are both white too, but we have relied pretty heavily on like maintaining and establishing like working relationships, and also because we're independent, you know, we're not beholden to someone else's whims. We get to choose who we reach out to, and they get to represent themselves the way that they want to, and we can just kind of let them do that. So I would say that just the fact that we have been kind of publishing for it'll be 6 years now, we just put a lot of stock in establishing like trust and working relationships with people that we hope to like continue and see grow and have them branch out and stuff like that.
Thank you. Great answers, everyone. Those are some really good strategies. I've got another one from the chat here. You spoke about limitations in funding. What is your dream funding scenario, and what kind of funding is missing right now?
I'll jump in there. We're currently self-funded, so everything is coming out of pocket. Ideally, people would just give us money without any need to follow up about it or any reporting. Um, but I think that there is, even as far as grants go, it can be tricky to kind of check off the right boxes to even qualify for the grants. And I think maybe, I don't know how realistic it is, but some loosey gooseier money that would be available would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, this question, I always think like, where do I start? This is like the one thing that Lauren and I talk about like constantly is like, how do we get more money? Um, Ideally, you know, if we could, we would love Canada Council operating funding or like a composite grant or something just that just kind of like allows us to do what we're trying to do. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to Canada Council is that like you plan out your budget, you're incredibly specific about what you're doing and what you need, and then they just kind of decide to give you less than what you're asking for, but you're still expected to do everything you said you were going to do. That is one of the most challenging things, I would say, to working with grants. Um, you know, we've thought about looking into advertising and sponsorships, but then that comes with a whole host of other issues that need to be dealt with. So something we're still talking about. We did recently launch like a membership campaign where we have 3 separate tiers at different price points that all come with different perks, merchandise, artist editions. Each comes with like a copy of the annual print journal. So we're kind of moving in a more like subscription direction to see if that can like pull in some more money for us.
I think that's a good question. It's always yeah, a dream scenario would be not kind of having to worry about securing funding. We're also kind of self-funded. We've been lucky enough to have a couple project grants in the past. But I find that the biggest issue for independent publishing is a lot of the publishing funding is geared towards like nonprofit. So it's really difficult to get operative funding if you're like an ad hoc collective. And I hope that there'll be changes to kind of make it more accessible in the future. And even it's just really hard to have the capacity, especially since I do Femme Art Review as a side project. It's hard to have the capacity to be editing so much and also be writing grants on top of that. So that's another kind of stressor itself.
Yeah, I can imagine. One other one from the chat here. Someone's wondering what's changed about your project since you first started, and how has your project grown?
I guess I'll jump into that. I feel like it's been really exciting to see throughout the past almost 4 years, just to see how it's grown based on the different writers we've been able to connect with. I feel like that's really, like you were saying before, one of the most kind of special parts is the relationship building that has gone through or into the publication throughout the years. It's been kind of a really lovely way to connect with other art writers and artists, and especially even just people with shared experience. Since we are like a queer publication, it's been kind of healing in a way for me to connect with other artists who have had a similar experience, especially when like a lot of queerness has been so invisible, kind of visibilized, if I can say that right. But yeah, that's been something that's been kind of special about doing it throughout the years. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it's a good one.
I think one of the big things for us was when we first started, we were like, is this do people want this? Is this relevant to people? And as we've been publishing things, there we've gotten a positive response. So it's kind of been nice to know that we have that community support and that people do think our work is relevant. And also we built a really wonderful network of people around us. We've met all kinds of people through the publication, and that's been really fantastic. I think that's a huge gain from where we started.
Yeah, I can't really speak to like the genesis of Peripheral Review because I wasn't there for that. This has been Lauren's baby for a long time. But I first got involved with Peripheral Review as a writer, so I have watched it for like a few years. I've seen it grow. I've seen the publishing capacity kind of grow, and yeah, just to reiterate that those working relationships have been kind of the bread and butter of that. Like the longer you're around, it's kind of inevitable. The more stability you gain in communities, the more people want to get involved. So yeah.
Ashley is wondering, continuing on the current question, where would you like to take the publication in the near future or in the next couple of years?
One of the things that Adrian and I have talked about is moving from strictly online to potentially doing a physical print edition, even an annual one, like these other lovely publications do. I think that that's a really nice next step for us.
Yeah, I mentioned our chapbook project that we're in the midst of currently. Based on how that goes, it could be something that we might continue. That is also very funding dependent. So there's always that in the back pocket. But yeah, in that way, we're kind of like changing up our model while keeping our mandate of like trying to do like new projects and find new ways to get people involved and just kind of build on what we've established already.
Yeah, I think that's a great question too. I One thing I'm kind of interested in doing. It's kind of tough, I guess. Hopefully, the pandemic has been a long time, but I'd be interested in doing more programming, like more events in the community, if COVID allows it in the future. Because I feel like that's something. It's great to have physical people in the space together to do programming there. That's something I'd be interested, and even digital programming as well. And yeah, just being able to continue, it'd be great to kind of continue doing print issues. Yeah.
Awesome. Dylan had a question earlier that was, what other organizations do you look up to or admire?
I personally look up to Peripheral Review and Femme Art Review. I have had my own work written about in Peripheral Review a number of years ago, and an exhibition that I organized was written about in Femme Art Review. And it's really, I look up to both publications. I think they're both fantastic in doing amazing work in the community. And I've been happy to be able to be involved in them in a little bit of a way.
Well, that's sweet. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's so sweet. I look up to both of you as well.
Yeah, ditto. I mean, I definitely, you have to admire anybody who is hustling to do what they believe in this publishing landscape that is changing so quickly in Canada right now.
All right, I just have one final question for you guys, which is kind of a double question. The sort of main meat of it is, what aspect of your local scene, wherever you may be based, do you feel is most underrepresented? And then also, since this is going to be our final question, feel free if there's anything that you would like to mention to the other panelists or attendees, just to throw in there, feel free to include that as well. But I'll leave the floor open for that last one.
I guess I'll jump in. I think that one of the aspects that is underrepresented, how I find that in London where we're based, it's very common that there's like a pool of artists that, and it's becoming more diverse, the pool, but um, just that are kind of selected for opportunities like repetitively. So I feel like when that happens, sometimes maybe underrepresented artists aren't included in that, or there's people who are kind of flying under the radar. So that's really what kind of excites me in doing Femme Art Review, is being able to find practices that haven't really gotten that spotlight, and connecting with them to get more visibility for their work. But yeah, I find that sometimes, like in a smaller town, maybe people work with the people that they know. Yeah.
I think I can add to that. I think that we face a similar problem in Windsor, where it's a relatively small community and can sometimes be a little bit incestuous. And I think one of the real challenges of working in the community, both in our local city level, but also in a larger arts community, is really pulling in other voices and giving other people opportunities, and kind of spreading things around a little bit more, and not being stuck in our own little incestuous circles necessarily.
Yeah, I would say that the word incestuous would apply to somewhere like Toronto just as much as it does to like regional areas. It's just kind of the way it goes in the arts. The people that you work with end up being the people that you're friends with. If you're lucky, your friends are doing some really cool things, and then you can kind of do your best to cover that and give them like a leg up if you have a platform to like support what they're doing. So that's what I would say in like somewhere like Toronto or Vancouver, is that's kind of what we try to do. Like we focus on independent art spaces, like DIY projects, stuff like that. That's kind of where we like to see some focus.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for those answers. And also, thank you very much for all of your answers, as this is going to be the wrap up of this panel. But yeah, thanks so much for coming. It was a pleasure to host everyone, Luke, 80, Angel, everyone who is in the attendees. Yeah, thanks so much for coming to this. Just as a reminder, it's been part of our Book and Zine Fest at ArtSpace, which is running until Sunday. This was the last panel of the week, but someone asked earlier where to find the earlier panels, which we have recorded, and we will be posting them on our YouTube in case you missed any of the panels earlier in the week with Sarah Lewis or the published Peterborough panel. But there's very much still time to check out the vendor booths on our website, and tomorrow we'll be having a takeover on our Instagram as well as on Sunday by some local artists to share a bunch of stuff about their process, and maybe spotlight some other artists as well. So keep an eye on our socials for that. Before we leave, I just want to shout out that none of this would have been possible without the generous support that we've received from a bunch of places: Ontario Arts Council, the Downtown Business Improvement Area, and some local businesses as well. We've got Watson and Lou, Iceman Video Games, and Black Honey Cafe as supporters for the Book and Zine Fest. So be sure to check them out if you haven't already. But that is going to be all for me. That wraps up the other art criticism panel. Again, thanks so much for coming, and please enjoy the rest of the Book and Zine Fest.